Welcome to MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 564, a special post-holiday edition. This program is in loving memory of Miriam Baselio Altes, Aleh HaSholem, and Emerita Baruch Ben Yomen Ben Menucha Lana Altes, Yukusil Ben Leah Rachel and Rachel Bas Liba Farkash, dedicated by Pinchas Tadis Ben Miriam and Sarah Bas Rachel Altes. Post-holiday indeed. We're coming from the rich month. We're still in the rich month, but coming from the rich holidays in this rich month that the Medrash calls Chedesh HaShvi, the Torah says the seventh month. Shvi from the word muzba bakel, like v'savota, sated. Rich with holidays. Meruba b'moyedes is another expression, which is why we don't say tachanun all the way till the end of the month. But basically the entire month, almost the entire month, is holidays. You have the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, Seres Yemei Tshuva, Yom Kippur, the 4 days between Yom Kippur and Sukkot, which the Medrash says is days when Jews are Eisik b'd mitzvos, preparing the Daled Minim, the Sukkot. Then of course the 7 days of Sukkot, concluding with Eishayin Rabbah, then Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah. And there you have already 23 days of the month of Tishrei, and one more week. So what it represents, in time of course, it represents a reservoir, a treasure of tremendous amount of resources that we receive, the Rosh Hashanah, the Seres Yemei Tshuva, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, in order to draw from it into the entire year, like a Reish, Rosh Hashanah, Reish, a head. Tishrei is the same letters as Reishis. And of course, Shabbos Bereishis, which we just read yesterday, also from the word Reishis, Reish. And the head is not just Tchilas Hashanah, as Chassidus emphasized, not just the beginning of the year, it's the head, the central nervous system. The head controls all the movements of the entire body. And the same thing, the Reish in Zman, in time, controls all the days of the year. So whatever happens in the Reish affects every day of the year. And that's what we draw. We draw renewal and God's sovereignty from Rosh Hashanah, from Yom Kippur, Tshuva, sanctity, holiness, and return, and from Sukkot, joy, as it grows each day of Sukkot all the way to the apex, to the ultimate of Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah, and we draw that into the entire year. So in a sense, Shabbos Bereishis, which we'll talk about shortly, is a type of interface between Tishrei and MarCheshvan and the following months of the entire year. That's where we are right now. It's a very powerful period because, as we all know, inspiration is one thing. Maintaining it and integrating it, internalizing it in our lives is a much bigger challenge. So the inspiration on all levels was given to us and we experienced through the holiday season. Now comes the hard work of integrating it. Fananda packen the peklach is an expression the Frierdiker Rebbe uses and the Rebbe cites. It means to unpack the luggage, or the baggage, the luggage that we gathered in our journey through Tishrei. Fananda packen the peklach literally means the packages. It means like the luggage that we gathered, and now we have to unpack it. Literally unpack it throughout the year. So this is a good transition into the question. We received many, many questions, as different people wrote right after the holidays on this period in time, as well as connected to Parsha Bereishis and Parsha Noach. And we'll talk about all of that. We'll also talk about some of the current events. Hopefully time will allow us to cover as much as possible. And this is a good opportunity to also announce that you can submit all these any question. Nothing is taboo, nothing is off limits, at ChassidicsApplied.com, totally anonymous, where you can also find many resources, Chassidus Applied resources, previous episodes, the contests, and many more materials that you can find on ChassidicsApplied.com. Now we also use AI, so if you use the AI feature at simonjacobson.ai or at meaningfullife.com, we'll soon include that feature in ChassidicsApplied.com too. You can ask any question, and everything that was ever said in these archives that we have in our archives will be made immediately available to you. You just have to ask the question, and you'll find the answer. So if you're looking for any particular topic, now you can find it through not just a search, but now the more advanced, new level, a new generation of AI tools. So one of the questions that came in: what is the meaning of the Vayakov holach l'darkei announcement after the Tishrei holidays? Can we ask Rabbi Jacobson to explain the Chassidic teaching Yaakov holach l'darkei and its relation to the end of the high holiday season, and how it empowers us to internalize the energy of the holidays and make the energy last the entire year? Thank you. So let's first begin with the history. The Rebbe brings many times that he heard from his father-in-law, Friedrich Rebbe, from the times of the Rabbeim. Doesn't say, I believe, exactly which Rebbe began, but it was a custom in Lubavitch. The Mitzvos Simchas Torah, they announced Vayakov holach l'darkei. Now that's, of course, a verse at the end of Vayetze, that Yaakov goes on his journey. That's what it means. Yaakov went on his way. Interestingly, there he's going back to Eretz Yisrael. But this expression was used as we go from Tishrei into the regular months of the year, relative to Tishrei regular, the routine. It's a journey. V'Yaakov holach l'darkei. And the Rebbe discussed many times. I remember specifically very big emphasis on that in the year Tovshin Lamed Ches, after the Rebbe had the heart attack, Shmini Atzeres. So that was something the Rebbe was kochen through the following weeks. But it was in many years, with emphasis of every word of that verse. Basically, the meaning is that after we've gathered all those resources through Tishrei, now Yaakov goes on, every Jew, holach l'darkei, goes on his way. Like literally, the time of the Beis Hamikdash, after the Aliyah L'Regel, the pilgrimage that was made, Sukkos, to the Beis Hamikdash in Yerushalayim, then everyone went back to their homes. Which is one of the reasons that we don't start saying Mashva Ruach HaMered HaGeshem until Zayin Cheshvan in Eretz Yisrael, because that's when the last Jews returned back home to the farthest reaches, the banks of the river, the Euphrates River, Nahar Pros, showing you the travel. So that was a technical travel, but it was more importantly a spiritual journey, taking the rich resources of the holidays of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Shmini Atzeres, Simchas Torah, and taking it on our way. And Dafki Yaakov, not Yisrael. Yaakov, as the Rebbe emphasized, Yud Ekev, b'mamshel the Yud of Elokus, of godliness, of the Yud Kevovke, into Ekev, into the heel, which is the lowest part of the body. In the Oves the Rab Nosson, the Medrash calls it the Malach HaMovesh Sheba Adam, like the angel of death within the person, because it's the most it's the most least sensitive part of the body, the heel of the foot. Ikvasa the Moshiach in generations is also called the heel of Moshiach, heel, the least amount of Giluyim, that when we go into the regular world, meaning the regular routine life, after Tishrei, where they had all the Giluyim and revelations, you'll be mamshel the Yud of Tishrei into Ekev, Yaakov, holach l'darkei, into the heel. And that's exactly the meaning of it. As this questioner wrote, that it helps us, empower us to internalize the energy. So it wasn't just an announcement, a technical announcement, it was also an empowerment. The Rebbe goes on to explain that V'Yaakov holach l'darkei in Tishrei itself, it's not just from Tishrei to Cheshvan, but in Tishrei itself you also have the idea of Yaakov holach l'darkei. You find, and the Rebbe brings from different sources, that sometimes it speaks about Sukkos, in Hemshech V'Kocha, that you already have the union of Yaakov holach l'darkei, Mitzvah Yom Kippur, Sukkos, Mitzvah Yom Kippur. And in concept, even Rosh Hashanah, once you leave Rosh Hashanah, there's a certain Yaakov holach l'darkei. More in a subtle form, but the same idea. But the big, full-blown version of it, or the experience of it, is at the end of the holidays. Then Shabbos Bereishis is obviously even more than right after Simchas Torah. And then Parshas Noach, after we go into Cheshvan, is even more so, because now you're really leaving even the month of Tishrei, the whole month of Tishrei, in a way, you could still say, is Meruba B'Meidis. The whole month is filled with the holidays. So bottom line, V'Yaakov holach l'darkei captures the journey, captures the transition from the highest levels of revelation throughout the holiday season, and bring it into, like we said, fananda packen de peklach, unpacking the luggage that we gathered, the resources we gathered through the holiday season. So with that, as we said, we're in a transition period. So first let's talk a little more in general about the transition, then we'll go into specifics, Shabbos Bereishis and parsha Noach, both as transition, also they're the themes of these chapters on their own, which obviously are all connected. But before that, let's talk a little more in general terms. Why is the next month after Tishrei called MarCheshvan? Mar, meaning bitter. Why is Cheshvan called MarCheshvan? An allusion that it's a bitter month because it doesn't have holidays. When there are amazing, joyous things that happen in Cheshvan. The Beis Hamikdash was finished, being built on the 8th of Cheshvan. The Rebbe Rashab was born on the 20th of Cheshvan. The flood ended and dried up, and Noach left the ark on the 27th, and many more things. So that is one of the reasons given why it's called MarCheshvan, because in contrast to Tishrei, which is Meruba, like we said, abundant, filled, sated with holidays, Shvi, Muzba, Cheshvan has no holidays. So it says in Sfarim, that's the reason that it's called, Dechemed and other places, called MarCheshvan. So an element of bitterness in contrast. This doesn't mean Cheshvan is a bad month, God forbid. We don't call it like Chodesh Av, for example, Mamayitim B'Simcha. The month of Av, we actually diminish in joy because of the sad events. But because, compared to Tishrei, it's lacking something. So there is a certain sadness. However, the goal is to bring the elokus, the godliness and revelation of Tishrei, Yaakov holach into Cheshvan, to sweeten the Mar. Tov Shenun, the Rebbe had a very fascinating sicha on this topic. He asked the question why Cheshvan has no holidays at all. Every month of the year, the Rebbe enumerated from Kislev through Elul, the Rebbe spoke about every month has holidays. Cheshvan has no holidays. Seemingly very unbalanced. Because Tishrei is filled with holidays. Maybe it could have been spread out a bit more. The transition shouldn't be so extreme. And the Rebbe explained, connecting it to Lech Lecha actually, that the real test to see that what we experienced in Tishrei was real is when you have a month that doesn't have any holidays. How will you do on your own, so to speak? Aveda b'koyach atzmei. So if there was even one holiday, that would already still be an oasis. So again, there's Shabbosim, of course, in Cheshvan. And every day, Ivdus Hashem b'simcha, we have to serve God with joy. But you don't have the strength, the Gili Alikus, the divine revelation that comes with a holiday. Because that's the real test. Now that you've been sated and you've been enriched and empowered with all these holidays, how will you do? So it's a mar. There's a certain bitterness. The mazel is akrev, scorpion, also a sign of something negative, toxic. So though there are special days during the month, but they're not holidays. Mar midli has also another meaning, like a drop, referring to Geshem, to the rain season that begins. Another reason it's called Mar. So here too you find, on one hand you say Gvur is Kshamim. Rain is like Gvura because it's only drops, but it's water. And it's our job is to take those drops and turn them into something that makes things grow and blossom and flourish and thrive. So you have this paradox of Cheshvan, which is the same theme we've been talking about, the transition from a higher state to bring it down, Dira b'tachtenim, the kavan is to come down in tachtenim, in the lowest of worlds, and there transform and make it a home for God. Can Mar be interpreted as master? Mar. So that I've not heard before, but let's I'll read the entire question. Dear Rabbi Jacobson, during your beis class on Friday, I commented that MarCheshvan, which is usually understood as bitter Cheshvan, because it has no holidays, can also be interpreted in a more positive way when we translate Mar as master. And there are places where Moshiach is referred to as master. I want to clarify my statement by sharing my source. It's in the story where the Baal Shem Tov meditates in a sense to Gan Eden and meets Moshiach and asks him, "Emeseik osi mar." When will the master come? Mar. And Moshiach replies, when your wellspring spread out all over the world. I believe my interpretation is in alignment with how we understand the energies of Tishrei and Cheshvan. In Tishrei, we are gifted great revelations of divine energy from above to inspire us. And at Cheshvan, with no holidays to give us extra energy, our Veda is to do the work from below with our own powers and initiatives. This also seems consistent with the story of the Baal Shem Tov, in which it implied that Mashiach's arrival is dependent on our work from our own power and initiatives by spreading the wellsprings of Chassidus all over the world. I bless that we're able to take advantage of this opportunity, and if we are successful at bringing Mashiach during Cheshvan, we can transform Cheshvan from being a month of no holidays to a month of the greatest holiday possible, when we have the era of peace and prosperity that we have been promised during the Messianic era. And adding, of course, that the Beis Hamikdash, like we mentioned before in the previous question, that the Beis Hamikdash was finished being built. Now they were talking the Beis Hamikdash of the past, but obviously there's a special power of the Beis Hamikdash Ashlishi as well. So thank you for that. It's an interesting insight. I've not seen it written, but it resonates. So I share it. And that's also part of the process of Malmata Lamaila, right? Cheshvan. And the Malmaila Lamata, what you're Mamshich in Tishrei, but in Cheshvan now we have to do it with Nishteh from below. And yes, Mashiach Emasei Kosi Mar as master. Still has to be understood how it fits into the word MarCheshvan, but the general idea, like B'derech Remez at least, the Chidudah is the expression sometimes, can be associated with that, and it also adds the Chassidus Applied dimension. Indeed, Chutza is outside of the Mayan Nesecha, the well springs, where Tishrei can be compared to the Mayan, and Cheshvan and the rest of the year can be compared to the Chutza that we're drawing from the well springs of Pnimis HaTeirah, which brings Mashiach, when there'll be a Dira B'Tachtenim down below in this world, a home for the divine. Beis Hamikdash. Okay. Now, being that we're talking post-holiday, so a question came in, which somewhat digresses, but still related to this period. It digresses from this theme. But since someone wrote it, I decided I'll read it. It's relevant. What are your thoughts on the consumption of alcohol on Simchas Torah in our communities? Why should drinking be allowed at all? The person wrote it out in more detail, so let me read it. Dear Rabbi Jacobson, I have often decried the obscene overconsumption of alcohol and Simchas Torah in our communities. The situation has gotten completely out of hand, with the mashka becoming the symbol of the holiday rather than the actual Torah. There's always a kiddush prior to akofis where alcohol flows like water, and by the time it's actually time for akofis, that's the dancing with the Torah, people are either too busy drinking to join or they are physically unable to do to being drunk. The completion and restart of the Torah are abandoned afterthoughts, performed hastily just to be yetzim, meaning just to get it done. I thought of a question this year. It is minhag Chabad to not have any decorations in the sukkah. And the reason given is that we should be appreciating the sukkah in its simplest, purest form without any external enhancements. The bare bones requirements of the sukkah, makeshift walls and cut branches for a roof should inspire our faith and observance of this mitzvah. My question is, why don't we apply the same logic for Simchas Torah? Why can't we just celebrate the joy of completing the Torah in its simplest and purest form without trying to enhance it with alcohol? And we all know that alcohol can be destructive to many people and cause a chilul Hashem on a holy day. So why insist on it? In my own community, the big draw to shul seems to be the booze, rather than the excitement of completing the Torah reading cycle. I'm surprised they have not yet changed the name of the Chag to Simchas Mashke. Anyway, I doubt I can change the status quo, because alcohol is unfortunately an indispensable Simchas Torah staple. But if you could answer my question, I'd be most appreciative. Thank you and all the best. So, you happen to be right. I know happen to be is the right expression, but you happen to be right. I was just reading a sikha from the Rebbe, I believe it was Tovshin Lamed Tes, where the Rebbe speaks about this and actually talks about the gzeira that he made, decree that people should not drink more than 4 small cups. He's talking about Simchas Torah, and actually says not only that, but the Frierdiker Rebbe actually called it a dover ma'os. It should be something that's despicable. It's a dover ma'os, mashka. Not just the taste, just because it's not an end in itself. So in addition to everything you wrote, the Rebbe made it clear that he made a gzeira. And the gzeira is all year round. Yes, there are times he took it off the gzeira, but that was the Rebbe's authority. And especially when it becomes an end in itself, God forbid, then definitely not kavanah. So I agree with you, Simchas Torah is about the Torah. Now, the fact is, through the generations, he did drink wine, they said l'chaim, but not as an end in itself, and definitely not to the point of intoxication where you're not even in control of yourself. You're not even focusing on Simchas Torah, as you point out. So I don't think I have to elaborate on it, it's pretty clear. But this goes back to many things that become more like social and cultural experiences that have very little to do with Kedusha. And in general, this drinking does not bring to any more Yiras Shamayim and more commitment to Torah and mitzvos. It's having a good time. Jews should always have a good time. But a person has to always be in control of their faculties. And even if drinking to be Yetzeh, that's what should be to be Yetzeh. So you do it the minimal. And the Rebbe made it very clear that you don't need the mashke to affect you and change your consciousness, so to speak. There's much more to be said on this. I discussed it in previous episodes over the years. But since you brought it up, absolutely. And it's again, just the main thing here is not just about the alcohol, not to be distracted by sideshows. There's a means and there's an end. On the other hand, to be melamed zchus hanidin, he didn't want to be besimcha. It's one of the ways, a natural way. It's not a natural way, it's a substance that's used. But the Rebbe made it clear, he doesn't want people using the substance to be joyous. Again, the minimal, fine. We make kiddush, there's wine. The Rebbe also was very upset when he heard people making kiddush on mashke. So the truth is, the Rebbe wrote that about Shabbos. On Simchas Torah, I don't know if there's something direct from the Rebbe, but in general, the point is very clear. Now, if someone wants to listen to the Rebbe, this is one of the things, this is the only place you have actually a gzeira from the Rebbe. He called it a gzeira, a decree. And he made conditions and all that came with that. Okay. But on the positive note, the main point of Simchas Torah is the great simcha, a simcha l'mayla ma'agbola, unlimited, unfettered. And that's what we carry into the entire year. So with that, let's go into Parsha Bereishis, which was yesterday, and discuss a few points of Bereishis. We'll talk about Noach. Again, hopefully time will allow us to cover all the questions that came in. And if not, either I'll follow up, or we'll find another opportunity where it'll be next year, after Moshiach comes. So, first question, Bereishis, which is a perfect talk about transition, segue from what we've been discussing. Bereishis is the interface between the end of Tishrei and Cheshvan. So we Shabbos Mevarchim Cheshvan. We bless the month of Cheshvan. So the first question is, what is the meaning of the Chassidic aphorism that the way you establish yourself on Shabbos Bereishis is how your year will go? Wie man stellt sich weg Shabbos Bereishis, als sie wird gehen der Hemshach HaShana. Shalach Reza is the exact expression, or almost the exact expression. Does it mean physically, if I wake up Shabbos Bereishis with a headache and am I doomed to have a headache every Shabbos the rest of the year? If something good happens, it will repeat every Shabbos the whole year. Do you have control over this, or is this fate? Or does the aphorism mean not physically, but on a spiritual level? So first of all, it's a statement to us. It's not just some abstract statement. That how you behave on Shabbos Bereishis, don't see it just as another Shabbos. It's a Shabbos Kloli. It's an all-encompassing one. Just like we talked about Tishrei the Eishis Reishis, or Rosh Hashanah, that what you do then affects the entire body, just like anything that comes from the head that controls the entire limbs and organs of the body. So Shabbos Bereishis has that element. So it's really about us, how we behave. So the way you establish yourself, what you do, will set the tone for the entire year. That's the very basic meaning of it. And as we explained, because it's a transition. Shabbos Bereishis is carrying Tishrei into Cheshvan into the entire year. And the very pasuk, Bereishis bara Elokim hashamayim va'aretz, the world is created anew, coming from Simchas Torah when we read the beginning of parsha Bereishis. Because it's talk about Isa bara Alma, you look into Torah, and with that God created the world. That's the blueprint of creation. So every year when we read Bereishis, it's like the world is created anew after Tishrei, the end of Tishrei. Just like Rosh Hashanah, is a renewal of all of existence. So then, Bereishis bara, the end of the month that began with Rosh Hashanah, continues that Reishis and carries it into the entire year. I don't believe it says anywhere, and correct me if I'm wrong, if someone finds somewhere that it does allude to that, that what happens on Shabbos Bereishis is going to what's the word I want to use? Portends what will happen throughout the year, like like this questioner asked. In other words, if something happens positive or negative, I don't think that's the meaning of it. I think it's much more how we behave on that day. Now, obviously, anything that happens on a special day like Shabbos Bereishis is more reflective of other things that will come, but not so much in the context of number one, free will is never taken from us. It's not like you wrote that's just a matter of fate. This is all about our control over it. It's not just a matter, that's whatever happens. In addition to the fact that even Rosh Hashanah, when the destiny of the year is determined, we still can change things. Tefillah, prayer through the year can change things. So it's not ever in any way a predetermined fact. At most, you can say it's a predisposition. It's a disposition for something, but never controlling our destiny. Okay. Why does the Torah begin with the letter beis and not alef? If it's because beis is the acronym for blessing, brocha, like it says in the Medrash, then why does the Hebrew alphabet begin with an alef? Let me read it more detail. Do I have a more detailed question here? Yeah, there's a teaching that the Torah started with the letter beis because alef can stand for utter, a curse, and beis can stand for brocha, blessing. But if the Hebrew alphabet is the building blocks of creation, then why does it start with an alef and not a beis? Okay. So let's take this step by step. In the Sikha, a very powerful Sikha, Shlach, Tov Shemem Zayin, which I'm quoting from now, printed in the Sefer HaSichas Tov Shemem Zayin, Shlach, the Rebbe speaks and asks the question and relates it to another question, which is why, if the whole purpose of creation is Bereishis, B'shvil Yisrael, B'shvil HaTorah, why was the Torah given 26 generations later? And connects it to this same question, similar question, to why the Torah begins with a beis and not an alef. An alef anechi Hashem Elokecha from Torah. And connects it also to the famous question that Rashi asks. Lo yitzarech haTorah lahaskil, the Torah should have began with Chedesh Hazalachem. It's the whole purpose of Torah is mitzvos. Why does it begin with Bereishis bara? And the answer he gives there is because the kavanah, even though the purpose is Torah Yisrael, but the kavanah is dira b'tachtenim. Losses lehem nachlas game. Koyach ma'asav higid la'ami, losses lehem nachlas game, as Rashi answers. To transform this world. And to transform the world, you have to go step by step. The gidrei tachtenim. Step by step, you begin with a beis, which is a lower level of elikus, an elikus that relates to existence. And then, 26 generations later, when the world is prepared from the bottom up, Now can come the great revelation of the alef, of Anechi Hashem Lekecha. And then in a footnote, the Rebbe says you can reconcile this with the explanation that was mentioned before. That beis begins with brocha. Alef also Zoshatei V'Sarur. Beis represents a lakus as it relates to existence. So the brocha within existence. The alef is a level of makif, the eir hablikvul that's higher than existence. On its own, there can be a unikas hachitzenim, a negative energy comes when such a high level, when you're not prepared for it, as he explains there. So it can lead to order. But once you begin with the beis, and you bring a lakus, godliness, within the parameters of existence, then you're prepared to have the hamshach of the alef should go where it needs to go, be'efem primi. So the beis prepares for the alef of Anechi Hashem Lekecha. But the kavan is definitely Anechi Hashem Lekecha. The world is a means to that. But the goal is to bring the godliness of Anechi Hashem Lekecha, of the alef, into the beis, basically. So there you have the whole picture. Aleph beis, yes, creation is with the Aleph beis, as the Alter Rebbe says in the beginning of Shar Yechid V'Amunah. And there it starts with the Aleph, because the Aleph is the foundation of it all. A lakus, that's higher than Teira Yisrael, that's higher than existence. But in a practical way, it begins with Bereishis bara Elokim, not with Achedesh Hazeh, with the beis. On that Bereishis bara Elokim, that the lakus that is mislabish, manifest through the tzimtzum of Elokim, din, an energy that creates existence on its terms. Then Adam and Chava brought into the world, they begin their service l'avda l'shamra, and there's 26 generations that prepare the world for Matan Torah, for the ultimate goal of bringing a lakus that's higher than existence, the Aleph, into existence. So that is the general picture. Relating to what we discussed earlier, that's exactly the same thing with Tishrei. Tishrei is a gilui from above. Bereishis brings it now into existence, the transition into the Cheshvan, into the rest of the year. What is the meaning of Tohu in the second verse of this week's parsha? So after Bereishis bara Elokim, we say, Va'aretz eis Tohu v'vayu, v'cheshach al pnei ha'tehem. V'ruach Elokim merachefes al pnei hamayim. So here's not the place to go into the details of every verse, every word of this verse, but in general it's referring to the fact that God first created the world, yes, but in the form of cheshach. It was a dark world. Cheshach al pnei ha'tehem. And Tohu v'vayu literally means a confused world, a chaotic world. And then comes Vayemer Elokim Yehi Eir. Same idea that we discussed. First it's Simsum, concealment, dark. Then the goal is to bring Eir, light. And how do you bring Eir? Teira Eir. Ner mitzvah v'teira Eir. The light of the divine into a dark world. That's in general. So then the follow-up to that is, someone writes, what is his connection to the Kabbalistic concept of Tohu? Well, in Kabbalah, of course, it talks about Tohu, the world of Shviras HaKelim, that before Tikkun was a world of Eris Merubim, intense energy, but Kelim Mu'atim, very minimal containers, and ultimately the tension and the dissonance created a shattering, which in psychological, personal terms means when there's a dissonance and a disconnect between the energy and the container. And that's how it was in the beginning of creation. And that in turn caused the shattering of the containers, which scattered the sparks. And that's the Ruach Elokim merachefes al pnei hamayim. Merachefes, says the Rizal, is rapach mes, 288 sparks. Mes, because the Shvira comes from the Psukim at the end of parsha Vayishlach, Vayimlach, Vayomos, the 8 kings that died. That death refers to the shattering of the containers, the sparks scattering all over the world. And our avodah now is to gather those sparks. And when we finish that work, that's when Moshiach comes. Did Tohu have free choice to prevent the containers from shattering? Since we're on this topic. Chassidus teaches that the world of Tohu imploded because the vessels couldn't contain the light. Does this imply there was no free choice in the world of Tohu? If there was free choice, perhaps the vessels could have made adjustments in order to be able to contain the revelatory light. Well, firstly, God is the one that created the world of Tohu, not humans. We may perpetuate it instead of repairing it, but it was all part of the plan. As a matter of fact, as I've explained a number of times, in a way you could say Tohu is actually a market correction to the Tzimtzum. Tohu is like basically a protest, stating there's something wrong. After the Tzimtzum, where the truth, reality of Einoid Milvadi Alakuz B'Pshitis, that the divine is the true reality, and an existence, Elam is beis, and existence is the novelty, there's something wrong going on. It's like the glove becomes more important than the hand. But Tohu is in a sense a world where that tension finally explodes or erupts. So in that sense, Tohu is actually correcting the problem by yelling out, there's something wrong. Then comes Tikkun to repair it. And a seisa manas livnes. Boine ilam samachrivan is the expression in the Medrash. Seisa means to raise a building with a Z in order to build a better building. So Tohu actually, its goal is not as an end in itself. The shattering of the containers is meant to be repaired through us. So the dissonance and all the incongruity and inconsistencies and the lack of alignment in our lives is all an expression of Tohu in our lives. And our mission is to create tikkun, to repair it, to gather the sparks that is allocated to each one of us. Where are those sparks? They're in your life. Where you live, your home, your family, your community, the food you eat, the liquid you drink, sleep, work. Everything you do in this material world has those sparks. And Hashem Mitzad Gover Kenanu, God leads the footsteps of a human being. So wherever you go, there are sparks for you to gather and create a tikkun in this Tohu Dika reality. And we see, looking around the world today, the moral confusion, the moral lack of a moral compass is literally expression of Tohu. And our job is to vayhi oir, to bring oir into that world and realign and create the proper balance. Okay. Let's continue on with more questions. What does it mean that man was created in the divine image? It's all parsha Bereishis, which of course is fundamental. As you see, the themes of Bereishis, every theme in Torah is central, but unlike other parshas, really sets the foundations. Creation of existence, purpose of creation, creation of Adam and Eve, the human being, their role. So the next part, after 6 days of creation, comes the creation of the human being, B'tzalmenu kid musenu nasa adam, B'tzalmenu kid musenu, in our image, in our likeness, Tselem Elikim. So what does this mean, Tselem Elikim, God's image? If God is spiritual, how can he have an image? And additionally, how can we be like God if God is perfect and only good and we're imperfect and have the capacity to sometimes do evil? So this is, of course, a very powerful question that's asked many places. Later it says in Yecheskel, says that loy adam hu v'loy mus adam. So he doesn't have any likeness. And we know we're not even allowed to create anything in the likeness of God. And here God created something in his likeness, which is human being. Ironic. And the answer is, as Chassidus explains, God, the etzem, what we call atzmos, or higher levels, is beyond any structure, beyond any parameters, beyond definition. But God shows he wanted to have a dira b'tachtenim, he wanted to have a home in this world. To have a world, you have to create a world with parameters, with structures, time and space. And a human being to enter this world and engage with a world of time and space and structure. So godliness in his infinite power, as the Vedas Arcadius says, Chassidus cites, just as he has the power to create the infinite, he has the power to create the finite. If not, that itself is limiting. He's not more infinite than he is finite, because infinite is also a toyar, a description, a definition. So he created indeed the Esesviras, 10 divine attributes. Is God Chachma, Bina? No, Chakim b'lei b'chachmi yediyah. He's not Chachma, but he can create an entity, or we'll call it emanate, Atzilus, an entity called Chachma. And this is now a divine attribute. So you could say God can manifest through Chachma, but that doesn't define him, that doesn't limit him. That's why we say, Les machshava tvisa beklal. Famous machlek, that no thought can grasp him, the famous machlek is between the Rambam and the Maral. The Rambam says, Hu amade hu yidei hu yidua. Who? God is the knowledge and the knower and so on. And the Maral says, what do you mean? God is not defined by knowledge. He's higher than das. And as the Alter Rebbe brings right in chapter 2 in Tanya, and then a few times throughout Tanya, that the Rambam is talking about Natzilus. According to the Ramak, the Arizal, as he says, even the Arizal, Eris and Kalim. The Maral is talking higher than Atzilus. So both are true. So God chose to create divine attributes. In that selim, in that image of the divine attributes, he created the human being. What we call Adam, from the name Adam Elyon, he's similar to that which is above. The Adam Atachten reflects and mirrors the Adam Elyon, like he says in Tanya, Nishtal Shlu Mehen. Our 10 faculties, Chabad, Chagas, Nihim, Moichen, and Midas in general, Nishtal Shlu Mehen, evolved from the 10 divine attributes. And our work is, on one hand, said we have those divine attributes, and that's Selam Elikim, in Meir Nevuchim and in the Kutei Teira Emer, he brings that Hein Hoya Adam Ka'achad Memenu, another pasuk in Bereishis refers to Bechira, free will. So we have the divine aspect within us, but we also have the Afar, Min Ha'adama. A human being is also a body and a soul. So on one hand, we have the structure of existence, and yes, we're imperfect, but we also have a divine aspect to us, the divine soul, as he explains in Tanya chapter 2. God imbued within us, breathed within us from his inners, more than he did with every other part of existence. That's not b'yipach ba'apal of nishmas chaim, meaning a real divine aspect to us, not just that we're divine creations, like a stone or a bird or a tree, but that we all have a divine element, the chelik elikam emal mamish. So now that neshama comes into a physical body, it now has the power to allow the divine to manifest, to control. Mahu chanun afata chanun, that we align ourselves and we emulate God's ways, v'alachta b'derachav, in this world. And that's how we understand that. So there again, a central theme as we go from Tishrei into the year of the very mission that we have and how we're meant to perform it and the tools and resources we're given to achieve that. So you could say the high holidays all infused, muzba, infused, like mashbian from the word also seveya, savata, sated us and infused within us the power of and helped actualize and help ignite the divine powers in our neshama, in our soul, to bring it into the world and make a dira b'tachtein. Were Adam and Eve commanded to follow any laws besides not eating from the tree of knowledge? Do we know if God had a bigger list of rules that Adam and Eve were supposed to obey, or were they allowed to do whatever they wanted as long as they didn't eat from the special tree? Well, the pasuk says, La'avda l'shamra. They were placed in Gan Eden to serve and protect. And the Chazal say on that what? La'avda is mitzvos esa, positive mitzvahs, l'shamra, to protect. Protect from what? Not to transgress, God forbid, the mitzvos leisesa. There's 365 leisesa. So right away, you know from that it wasn't just not to eat from the tree of knowledge. That's what it says explicitly. But remember also it was called tree of knowledge of good and evil. That means they had an understanding of good and evil even though they hadn't experienced it yet.
good is a mitzvah. Evil is alesa, is the aveda, the opposite of a mitzvah. So they clearly were given guidelines. And we say Sheva mitzvahs b'nei neach. So the Rebbe Marash actually has a footnote where he asks, why is it b'nei neach? The 6 mitzvahs besides Eivrim and Achai were given to Adam already. So clearly they were given the mitzvahs. So they're called because the 7, the total, including Eivrim and Achai, because remember, Adam and Chava were vegetarians. So Eivrim and Achai was not even a question. They didn't eat meat altogether. So as a result of all 7 being given to Noach again after the Mabul, so that adds, and that's why it's called B'nai Noach, the most likely answer. But you have to say that these mitzvahs, the moral mitzvahs, were there as well before. But that leads us to the next few questions. The next question being, did they have access to the Torah? The Torah wasn't officially given for another 48 years. 2,448, like we said, 26 generations. Do we know if Adam and Eve had access to the Torah, even just a part of it, so they could use the Torah's knowledge as a guidebook of how to survive and thrive in the physical world? So we do know. The formal Torah, as we said, was given by Har Sinai. But it does say about the Ovis that Kaimu Kol HaTorah Kedem Shenitnu. They fulfilled the Torah even before it was given. And we say this also about Adam. That's why you find Adam did tshuva, he knew how to daven. But it was not formal, it was not mitzvah ve'esa in the language of the Gemara. Mitzvah ve'esa means you're commanded to do. They did it because they were spiritual entities and they had either a sense or an instinct, or it was downloaded into them as well. Remember, Istaka Baraisa Bara Alma, the whole world was created with the blueprint of Torah. So Torah precedes existence. Torah precedes Adam and Chava. And being that they were created by Yitzir Kapov, God himself created them with the divine in the divine image, you have to say that they had some type of intelligence and superior intelligence, especially a Pi Kabbalah, Chassidic, that Adam was an Neshama Klolis that encompasses all the generations, that they had some awareness of the spiritual message of Torah. But as Chassidic explains, obviously they didn't mekayim mitzvos maisius. There wasn't yet Yetzias Mitzrayim, so they couldn't perform a mitzvah connected to that. But the concept of Yetzias Mitzrayim, going out of your boundaries, out of your constraints, and so on. So they had that, which leads us to the next question. Were they considered Jewish? So we know that the idea of being Jewish began by Matan Torah, to the point that the Jews are all called Gerim, converts. They had to convert. Why? Because the concept of Jew and non-Jew didn't exist before Matan Torah. There was also not just a thing called non-Jew, because it's interdependent. You call Goy Ha'aretz, you call the nations of the world. And that includes Adam and Chava, and Avram, and Yitzchak, and Yaakov. There's a whole sefer called Derech Mitzosecha, and Anigla Sefer. Parashas Drachim is another name for it, that discusses at length the role of what status did the Ovis have, the Ovis and Nemois have. So generally speaking, they had the status of non-Jews compared to after Matan Torah. But not really, because it wasn't non-Jews either. It was human beings, created in the divine image. And they, through their Avodah, lived up to it and elevated themselves, like Chassidus says, to Sheresh HaNivraim. They were able to reach the source of creation, but not higher, because that you need Matan Torah. On the other hand, we say the Ovis Hein Hein Amarkava, they were Markava, they were Neshamas of Atzilus. So they had tremendous souls. But did it permeate their bodies? Besides mitzvah of Bris Milah, they were not given mitzvahs, actual mitzvahs. So Baruchni is they did them, but it didn't transform the Gashmizdika world. That happens after Matan Torah. And there's a lot discussed about this in the MyLife Chassidus. There's an interesting note from the Rebbe in the Maimer in Tovshin Yud. I believe it's a Shavuos Maimer, where he talks about there's 2 aspects to the difference between before Matan Torah and after Matan Torah. But the point being that Baruchins, they definitely had Torah. And therefore, in a sense, you could say Avram is the first Jew, meant in spirit. He's the first Jew. The pioneer of monotheism, recognizing God. Tzedek, Stokum, Lasis, Stokum, Mishpat. And, of course, connecting to Hashem on very high levels. It deserves more discussion, but suffice for now. If Adam and Eve had not eaten from the tree of knowledge, would Moshiach have come right away? If so, how would all the divine sparks been elevated? And what have we achieved over the last 5,786 years? Or 85 years, we're going now into Tovshin Pei Vav. Or as the way someone wrote it in more detail, if they had not eaten, how would all the divine sparks that we have been traveling around the world for almost 6,000 years, been refined if Mashiach came then before we had a chance to refine them? It's a very good question. I believe I spoke about this in the past. So briefly, let me say this. The Alter Rebbe in Torah gives an example. Had Adam and Chava not eaten from the tree of knowledge, so the bidder of all the 288 sparks we spoke about before, Merachefes, Rapachmes, would have happened Mamayl Lamata. Yes, it was their Avdol L'Shamra, their work, but they wouldn't have to travel all over the world to find the sparks. It would be like a great torch that would have drawn all the sparks to them. Being that they did eat from the tree of knowledge, now you have to go and divide the work to more people. And the transmigration begins. We have to go find the sparks and go there. So Avram travels to Eretz Yisrael. Just briefly, obviously the journey began before that. And through the generations, and that explains also what the Frierdiker Rebbe says, coming to Chatzi Kadra Tachten, the lower hemisphere, meaning America, was another Slav in this, because Matan Torah didn't happen in a revealed way in this hemisphere. So it's bringing and going to find the sparks. And then the Vayeshev Tavshin and Beis, the Rebbe says, and today we have Jews everywhere, all over the world, to gather these sparks. So the difference would have been, then it would have been Mamayl Lamata, had Adam and Chava not eaten from the tree of knowledge, which would have brought Moshiach, but a very different reality. Whereas now, when it comes Mamat Lamayla, as he explains in Shari Eira, the Mitler Rebbe, it's more beprimius and much more betachtenim, like we discussed earlier as well. That's briefly the bottom line. So our accomplishment over all these years is not just back to square one. Adam and Chava would have, now the accomplishment, they would have done it anyway. Now we do it beprimius, so it's a whole different level of transformation. Now, obviously, we wanted Moshiach to come as soon as possible and not wait for all these years. But after the fact, that's the Maila that comes, Mamatla Maila. Was the Garden of Eden a physical place on earth? Where is its location? Or was it an abstract, spiritual place? I believe I spoke about this in previous episodes in MyLife Chassidus Applied. But briefly, the MyLife Chassidus that talk about this, a Maimon from the Alter Rebbe, the Mitler Rebbe, Tzemach Tzedek, and you can find it. I wrote a essay on this in English, In Search of Eden, I believe it's called, to establish where is Gan Eden. There was definitely a place, because the pasuk says it was situated by the corner where four rivers met. So obviously there's spiritual meaning to it, but it's also rivers on this earth. And it's not so simple to find where these four rivers meet that are spoken about. So briefly, what the Maimer says, these Maimorim say, is that Gan Eden was a Gashmiistic place, but before Chet Tzadas, it was Ruchni Sheba Gashmis. It was a more sublime Gashmi. And once they ate from the Eitz Hadas, it became more Ruchni. An example given is from the sweetness of an apple. When you look at an apple, you don't see sweetness, but there's sweetness within there. So you look at the earth, you don't see Gan Eden now, but it's hidden somewhere. So I discussed and speculated that maybe referring to that Gan Eden was what we would call now southeastern Iraq. Maybe it was right by the water. And what happened was the water covered it up, which would be that it's there physically, but we don't see it, or it's not livable. There are many details about this that need to be elaborated upon, but that's in brief, if you want to look it up. But because of time, I'm just going to be short about this. Did Cain ever repent for killing Abel? Did he apologize? Did he ever reconcile with Adam and Eve after what he did? So in the Medrash, the Rebbe brings this, I believe, in some sichos. In the Medrash Tanchuma, there are two opinions on this matter. In the Psukim itself, it doesn't seem like he did tshuva. He came to God saying that he's going to be a target, and that's why Hashem protected him. The different meanings behind the sign that God made on his head, what that means exactly on his face, his forehead. But it doesn't say specifically he did tshuva. But in the Medrash, there are two opinions. Now we can learn a lot of lessons of that, obviously. Both what Cain did was, of course, horrible, murdered his own brother, responsibility we have. And the fact that he did not repent, what does that mean? And later, ultimately, he was killed by his grandson. They mistook him for an animal. So there's a lot to discuss on that matter. But just to answer the question, there are two opinions on this. And let's suffice with that. As I said, time is limited. I thought I'd be able to cover more. What should I tell you? So I will do the following. Let me do two more. Why did the Chabad Gabbai wear a shtreimel when he sold the mitzvos on Shabbos Bereishis? So this I could share from my own memory. Every Shabbos Bereishis they would sell the mitzvos, usually after the MyLife Chassidus that the Rebbe would say, or MyLife Chassidus. In the early years it was Rabbi Jacobson Gordon, Olav Shalom, till Tavshir Chavtes was when he passed away. And then the next Gabbai was Rabbi Shia Pinson. And they always wore shtreimel, and the Rebbe would always point they should wear shtreimel. Another time of the year was on Shabbos Parsha Mishpatim, they did a gmach, a malava malka for a gmach. Rabbi Yechon Gordon also ran. Later it was be his son-in-law, Rabbi Shimon Goldman. And again, wearing a shtreimel, and they would say a dvar Torah or a story. Very interesting. Now, Chabad, they don't wear shtreimel, which we'll talk about in a moment. So why? So we always understood, Gabbai is doing something formal. The shtreimel reflects a type of formality, not takanat and Chabad, but being that it was a special occasion. That's how we always saw it. A little like purimdik, but not, God forbid, in any dismissive way. More of a, unique. Some speculate the reason is because he was saying a Torah before his Rebbe, the Rebbe sitting there by the Fabrengen. So the Gabbayim, in a sense, it was like they became like more Polish chassidim for the moment. I'm not sure which it is. Maybe there's another reason, but that's what was done. With that, I'll just share one story. I remember Tavshin Mem, Rabbi Pinson. He told a story. It was printed then. A Migdal Oiz came out then from Rabbi Munshine, Shua Munshine. They told a story that in the time of the Alter Rebbe, they were first drawing the first maps of the world. Navigators. It wasn't yet through satellite, obviously. They showed the Alter Rebbe a map of America. And he said, there's a mistake on the map. They asked him, how could he? He was never there. She says, Taka baraisa bara alma. When you look in Torah, God created the world. Bereishis. And you see, it's based on the Torah that there's a mistake. From the rare times that the Rebbe commented, the Rebbe would sit in his chair while the story is being told and the mitzvos were sold, with his head down in the sefer. But from the rare times the Rebbe reacted then, without, I think, even picking his head up from the siddur or the chumash he was looking at, the Rebbe said that what the ikar is, abashas mekumt in America zomen nishmachen kintas. The main thing is that when you come to America, you shouldn't make a mistake. And I remember we thinking about what does that mean. So b'pashtus it means that in America, when you come to America, you should make sure it's aligned with Torah. Alter Rebbe saw it, Lamata. From Torah, he saw that there was a mistake in the map. Now that we're here in America, make sure we're aligned to Torah. Or maybe you can explain it in different ways. I think appropriate for Shabbos Bereishis. So why taka don't Chabad chassidim wear shtreimels? So fact is, we do know that the earlier Rabbeim did wear. There's a famous story with the Mittler Rebbe. The Mittler Rebbe is a spitzike shtreimel, meaning a shtreimel with like a yarmulke that rose above the shtreimel. And there was a flat yarmulke that did not rise. The Rebbe spoke about it in Tishrei Tavshin Mem alef. Mem alef. He even used his hands then to show that by the Mittler Rebbe, para, vapor came out, because his great spilus within, so there was steam that came out of the tip of the shtreimel. The Rebbe made like this. Some chassidic we see in the picture. So they wore shtreimel. The history of it is that up till the Rebbe Marash, it seems that Rebbe Marash also wore, but not all the time, on Shabbos and Yontif. Then the Rebbe Marash told the Rebbe Rashab that he should only wear a shtreimel in Lubavitch. And that's what he did. Once he moved away from Lubavitch to Rostov, he didn't wear shtreimel anymore, and whenever he traveled out of Lubavitch, he didn't. Now there's a shtreimel, there's a spodik. Frierdiker Rebbe we see in pictures did wear, but only again Shabbos and Yontif. I believe that only began after the Rebbe Tznechaim Mushka's wedding. Before that, he did not wear one. So we don't know all the reasons, but definitely it was more of a Pelisha and other chassidim that did, and do it today with the chassidim as well. And Chabad never embraced it, definitely not all week long. I mean, well, I shouldn't say no one wears it all week long. Even a Rebbe doesn't. But not on Shabbos and Yontif either. The Rabbeim, as I said, went through a shtalshlus. I never heard an explanation for it. They say that the Rebbe, if he was given the Frierdiker Rebbe's spodik, he would have worn it. We don't know for sure. But again, when would he wear it? Shabbos, Yom Tov? Bottom line is, that's the difference, and I don't know if there's a deeper spiritual reason. Now, I wanted to talk about a bunch of other things, including Parsha Noach, which is coming, and I think I'll have to do that next week. But I do want to make mention of one thing, which was that the hostages that were freed in Hashanah Rabbah, and virtually 2 years to the day, Shmini Atzeres is when they were taken. Shmini Atzeres is also the yard site of the 1,200 plus men, women, and children who were barbarically and killed on that day. So I have a bunch of questions that came in on this. I just want to address one, and then I'll do the others next week. How should we react to the recent release of the hostages and the peace proposal advanced by President Trump? So I think we have to separate things. Once they've been released, it's unbelievable, absolutely a simcha, pidyon shvuyim, the release of captives, for them, for their families. Matzal nefesh achas miYisrael, you save one Jew. It's like saving a world after what they went through, for their families. But there's mixed feelings. Not for them. They should celebrate, and we celebrate with them. You see the outpouring of love and unity that happened right after they were released, even as the leading into it. And should happen on Hashanah Rabbah, the day of great deliverance, great salvation. And Shmini Atzeres is coming the next day. But there's the mixed feelings because remember, let's not forget what happened on Shmini Atzeres 2 years ago. And Shmini Atzeres is the yard site of all these tragically killed people, the tragedy. And the war is not over. So we hope for the best, but there are mixed feelings about the whole thing. Now, of course, there people ask the question, what about the exchange of hostages, 24,000, whatever? So again, before the fact, we could discuss it. Now, after the fact, we celebrate the freedom of the hostages. See that Hashem finally had Rachmanis. I just wanted to talk about that for a moment because it just happened. But because of time limits, I'm going to stop right now. And I'll continue Mitzvah Hashem Bli Neder next week. You know, everyone should have a real Vayakov holach darkei hatzlacha in your journey to bring the powerful and rich treasures and resources that we gathered through Tishrei and unpack it, each of us respectively in our corner of the world. Finish the job of Vayhi Oir, bringing light and elevating all those sparks, and finally could be zeicha to Osim Marda Malka Moshiach in the month of MarCheshvan, even before that, with the Gula Amitis Vashlema. And hopefully this program and other efforts toward Yefutza Ma'asecha Chutza help speed this up. This has been MyLife Chassidus Applied. We're here every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time, ChassidusApplied.com. A good gebenched yor.
This program is brought to you by MyLife Chassidus Applied. Please help us continue our programs. Make even a small contribution at ChassidusApplied.com/donate.